They thought forcing this quiet transfer student to drink toilet water would break her. They had no idea she was hiding a secret that would leave them both crying on that bathroom floor. Derek Mitchell had ruled Westfield High for 4 years straight. His family's $2 million donation bought him immunity from consequences. Perfect grades bought him respect, and his crew of followers bought him power. But when Derek met Harper Williams, that carefully constructed empire crumbled in exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds. By the end of this story, you'll discover how one moment of desperation can reveal the warrior hiding inside the quietest person in the room. If you've ever felt powerless against someone who seemed untouchable, this Austin High School showdown will remind you that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one nobody sees coming. Westfield High wasn't just another Texas school. It was where helicopter parents sent their children to compete in academic gladiator battles. The hallways gleamed with marble floors that reflected the anxiety of students carrying $20,000 laptops in designer backpacks. Every conversation revolved around early admission letters, internship connections, and which family could buy their child's way into the Ivy League fastest. This was where previous transfer students had either adapted to the cutthroat environment or disappeared entirely, vanishing back to their original schools after mysterious academic failures or sudden family relocations. Have you ever walked into a place where you knew you didn't belong? Drop a comment below and share how you handled that first day. Because Harper Williams was about to teach everyone at Westfield that belonging isn't something you buy with money or intimidate your way into earning. Your stories of overcoming impossible odds inspire others to find their own strength. And creating content that empowers the underdog takes countless hours of research and storytelling craft that thrives on community support from viewers who believe in these messages. Derek Mitchell adjusted his Rolex Submariner watch. The $18,000 timepiece caught the October sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Westfield High's main corridor. At 18 years old, Derek possessed everything money could purchase: chiseled jawline inherited from his investment banker father, designer clothes that cost more than most families' monthly rent, and grades that stayed perfect thanks to private tutors who charged $500 per hour. His sandy brown hair was styled with products that cost more than minimum wage workers made in a week, and his blue eyes held the casual cruelty that came from never facing real consequences. Derek's academic record sparkled like his family's portfolio valedictorian track since freshman year. Debate team captain, National Merit Scholar semi-finalist, and early admission candidate to Harvard, where his grandfather's name adorned a library wing. The Mitchell family operated with surgical precision, every achievement calculated, every failure erased with strategic donations, every obstacle removed before Derek even realized it existed. His mother scheduled his life in 15-minute increments. His father networked at country club dinners to ensure Derek's path to success remained obstacle-free. Standing beside Derek, Kyle Patterson represented the perfect loyal follower. Tall and broad-shouldered from years of expensive personal trainers, with the kind of desperate eagerness that came from knowing his own family's fortune depended on maintaining connections with the Mitchell dynasty. Kyle's role was simple: agree with Derek, laugh at Derek's jokes, and ensure Derek never faced opposition without backup. Together, they commanded respect through a combination of wealth, intimidation, and the unspoken understanding that crossing them meant social suicide at Westfield. The social hierarchy at Westfield operated like an investment firm. Everyone understood their position, their value, and exactly how much they could afford to lose. Students competed not just for grades but for proximity to power, knowing that the right friendship could mean internship opportunities, college recommendation letters, or business connections that would define their entire future. Teachers walked carefully around certain families, understanding that parent donations funded their salaries and that academic integrity sometimes bent under financial pressure. This ecosystem had produced senators, CEOs, and Supreme Court justices, but it had also created young people who viewed compassion as weakness and empathy as a liability. Derek had learned early that emotions were tools to be weaponized. Tears meant vulnerability. Kindness indicated stupidity. And helping others without personal gain was a mark of failure. The Mitchell family motto wasn't written anywhere official, but Derek had absorbed it through 18 years of careful conditioning. Winners take what they deserve, and losers accept what they're given. Everything about this environment was designed to create predators, and Derek had evolved into the apex specimen until Harper Williams walked through those glass doors carrying nothing but a worn backpack and quiet determination. Harper Williams stepped off the Austin City bus at 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before most Westfield students arrived in their luxury vehicles. The October morning carried the crisp edge of changing seasons, and Harper pulled her second-hand jacket tighter against the chill as she walked toward the imposing glass structure that would become her battleground. At 17, Harper possessed the kind of understated presence that made people initially overlook her. Average height, auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and clothes that were clean but clearly purchased at discount stores rather than boutiques. Her green eyes held depths that spoke of experiences most Westfield students couldn't imagine. Growing up in Detroit's East Side meant learning to read danger in facial expressions, understanding when to speak and when to disappear, and developing the kind of street wisdom that no private school curriculum could teach. Harper's hands showed calluses from years of after-school jobs, working at her aunt's diner, stocking shelves at grocery stores, and helping her mother clean office buildings when money ran particularly tight. The Williams family had moved to Austin for her mother's job transfer, a promotion to regional nursing supervisor that came with enough salary increase to afford rent in Westfield's district. Harper's acceptance to the prestigious high school came through academic merit alone. Her 4.0 GPA and perfect standardized test scores earning her a spot that other families paid consultants $50,000 to secure. She understood the opportunity this represented. Westfield's college placement statistics could change her entire family's trajectory if she could survive the social minefield long enough to graduate. What Derek and his crew couldn't see in Harper's quiet demeanor was the discipline forged through 5 years of competitive boxing. Training that began when she was 12 and her mother grew tired of Harper coming home with bruises from neighborhood bullies. Harper's coach, Maria Santos, had been a professional fighter before retiring to train at-risk youth in Detroit's community center. Maria had recognized something special in Harper immediately, not just physical potential, but the kind of mental toughness that turned good fighters into champions. Harper's boxing record included 3 Golden Gloves titles, 2 regional championships, and sparring sessions with professional fighters who'd taught her that real strength came from discipline, not aggression. She'd learned to read opponents' tells, to remain calm under pressure, and to end fights with surgical precision rather than brutal force. But more importantly, Maria had taught her when not to fight, understanding that true power meant choosing your battles wisely and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The irony wasn't lost on Harper that she was hiding her greatest strength in an environment that worshipped power. But she'd made a promise to her mother that this fresh start would be different. No more fighting, no more trouble, no more reasons for late-night phone calls from principals or police officers. Harper planned to graduate quietly, earn her scholarship to college, and never give anyone at Westfield a reason to discover the warrior that lived beneath her carefully constructed, peaceful exterior. She had no way of knowing that Derek Mitchell's insecurity would make that promise impossible to keep. First period, advanced placement history should have been Harper's sanctuary. The kind of academic environment where intelligence mattered more than bank accounts and where her preparation could level the playing field. Mrs. Rodriguez had taught at Westfield for 15 years, long enough to recognize genuine brilliance when she saw it. And Harper's entrance exam scores had caught her attention immediately. The classroom reflected Westfield's wealth smartboards worth more than most cars, textbooks updated annually regardless of need, and ergonomic chairs that cost $800 each. Derek settled into his usual front-row seat, the position that allowed him to dominate class discussions while making eye contact with Mrs. Rodriguez to ensure his participation was noted and appreciated. His leather portfolio contained notes prepared by his private tutor, analysis and insights that would impress the teacher and intimidate other students who couldn't afford such preparation. Derek's strategy was always the same: speak first, speak loudest, and make sure everyone understood that his family's donations gave his opinions extra weight. Harper chose a seat in the third row, close enough to participate meaningfully, but far enough back to observe the classroom dynamics before inserting herself into them. She'd learned in Detroit that survival sometimes meant understanding the power structure before challenging it, and Westfield's academic hierarchy was more complex than most corporate boardrooms. Harper opened a notebook that cost $3 at a convenience store. Her pen was a basic ballpoint rather than the Mont Blanc fountain pens favored by her classmates. But her handwriting was precise and her attention focused entirely on Mrs. Rodriguez's opening lecture. The day's topic was the Marshall Plan, America's post-World War II strategy for rebuilding Europe through massive economic investment. Mrs. Rodriguez began with her standard approach, presenting the historical context, and then opening the floor for analysis and debate. Derek's hand shot up immediately, his response delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything important in his entire life. The Marshall Plan represents America's natural role as global leader, Derek declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions treated as facts. Countries that accept American aid should expect American influence. That's just smart international business. My grandfather always said that charity comes with strings attached, and the Europeans understood that accepting our money meant accepting our leadership. Several students nodded approvingly, not because Derek's analysis was particularly insightful, but because agreeing with Derek was always the safe play at Westfield. Kyle Patterson applauded slightly, his support automatic and enthusiastic. Mrs. Rodriguez acknowledged Derek's contribution with the kind of professional smile teachers used when wealthy donors' children spoke, then looked around the room for additional perspectives. Harper's hand rose slowly, her movement deliberate rather than eager. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded toward her with curiosity. This new student hadn't spoken in class yet, and her entrance exam suggested she had plenty to contribute if she chose to engage. I think Derek's analysis oversimplifies the complexity of post-war reconstruction, Harper said, her voice steady but respectful, designed to challenge ideas, rather than attack personalities. The Marshall Plan wasn't just about American leadership, it was about preventing the kind of economic desperation that had led to fascism in the first place. Europeans weren't passive recipients of American charity. They were partners in building an economic system that would benefit everyone involved. The classroom fell silent, not because Harper's analysis was wrong, but because no one had directly contradicted Derek Mitchell in recent memory. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his blue eyes narrowing as he processed this unexpected challenge to his authority. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly uncertain how to respond when his role model faced intellectual opposition. Mrs. Rodriguez recognized the quality of Harper's analysis immediately. This wasn't someone repeating talking points from expensive tutors. This was genuine critical thinking applied to complex historical questions. Interesting perspective, Harper, she said, genuinely engaged with the discussion now. Can you elaborate on how you see the partnership dynamic working in practice? Harper consulted her notes briefly, not because she needed to check facts, but because the pause allowed her to choose her words carefully. Look at West Germany specifically, she continued, her confidence growing as she warmed to the subject. American investment was substantial, but German leadership made the decisions about how to rebuild their economy. The partnership worked because both sides brought value. America provided capital and markets. Germany provided innovation and industrial expertise. It wasn't colonialism disguised as charity, it was smart cooperation that made everyone stronger. Derek felt something unfamiliar burning in his chest, a combination of embarrassment and anger that he'd never experienced in an academic setting. This transfer student wasn't just disagreeing with him, she was demonstrating a depth of understanding that made his prepared talking points sound shallow by comparison. Worse, other students were listening to her with the kind of attention they usually reserved for him. That's a very naive way to look at international relations, Derek shot back, his tone sharper than he'd intended, betraying the irritation he was trying to hide. Countries don't form partnerships with equals. They form alliances with those who can serve their interests. America invested in Europe because we needed allies against the Soviet Union, not because we believed in some idealistic notion of cooperation. Power dynamics are what drive history, not good intentions. Harper considered Derek's response carefully, recognizing the shift from academic debate to personal challenge in his tone and body language. She'd seen this pattern before in Detroit, young men who confused volume with authority and who viewed intellectual challenges as personal attacks. But this wasn't a street corner in her old neighborhood. This was an academic environment where ideas were supposed to be evaluated on their merit rather than the wealth of whoever proposed them. Power dynamics absolutely drive history. Harper agreed, her tone remaining respectful despite Derek's obvious hostility. But effective power comes from building systems that benefit multiple parties, not from dominating those who depend on you. The Marshall Plan worked precisely because it created economic interdependence. Europe needed American investment, but America needed European markets and allies. Sustainable power comes from creating mutual benefit, not from maintaining dependence. Mrs. Rodriguez was genuinely impressed. This level of sophisticated analysis was rare even among Westfield's carefully prepared students. Harper wasn't just memorizing textbook interpretations, she was applying complex theoretical frameworks to historical evidence in ways that demonstrated real intellectual maturity. The teacher made a mental note to recommend Harper for the advanced placement exams and possibly early admission to college-level courses. Derek realized with growing horror that Harper was winning this exchange, not through manipulation or social connections, but through demonstrating superior understanding of the material. Other students were taking notes on her analysis, treating her insights as valuable, rather than dismissing her because of her obvious financial limitations. This had never happened to Derek before. Academic dominance was supposed to be his guaranteed territory, the one arena where his preparation and resources ensured victory. The bell-ending first period couldn't come soon enough for Derek. But even as students gathered their materials and prepared to leave, he could hear conversations continuing Harper's analysis rather than his own. Kyle looked to Derek for guidance about how to respond to this unprecedented challenge, but Derek had no strategy for dealing with someone who threatened his intellectual superiority through merit rather than manipulation. As Harper packed her simple notebook and bargain store pen, she felt the weight of Derek's stare and recognized the dangerous shift in his attention. She'd hoped to blend into Westfield's academic environment without attracting notice, but her refusal to defer to Derek's assumed authority had apparently made that impossible. Harper understood that she'd just made an enemy. She simply had no idea how far Derek would go to restore his damaged ego. Walking toward second period. Harper reflected on the choice she faced. She could apologize to Derek privately, defer to his opinions publicly, and try to repair the damage to his pride. Or she could continue participating authentically in class discussions and risk escalating this conflict. The smart play would be to back down, to recognize that Derek's family connections and financial resources gave him advantages she couldn't match in any sustained confrontation. But Harper had spent too many years watching bullies terrorize weaker students, and her mother had moved heaven and earth to give Harper this opportunity at Westfield. She wasn't going to waste it by pretending to be less intelligent than she actually was just to protect some rich kid's feelings. If Derek wanted a war, Harper would give him one. She just hoped he was prepared for the kind of fighter Detroit had taught her to become. Derek spent the break between first and second period in the bathroom, staring at his reflection in mirrors that cost more than most people's monthly rent and trying to process what had just happened. For 18 years, academic superiority had been as automatic as breathing. His family's resources ensuring that he always had better preparation, better tutors, and better insights than his competition. The possibility that someone could outthink him through natural ability rather than purchased advantages had never occurred to him. Kyle found Derek there, his expression troubled as he watched his friends struggle with this unprecedented challenge to their social order. "That was weird, right?" Kyle offered tentatively. "I mean, she's obviously smart, but she doesn't understand how things work here yet. Maybe someone should explain to her about showing proper respect to established students." Derek's reflection showed a young man who had never learned to lose gracefully, because his family had spent 18 years ensuring he never faced genuine defeat. The anger burning in his chest wasn't just about one classroom discussion. It was about the existential threat Harper represented to his entire worldview. If academic merit alone could challenge his position, then what did that say about everything else he'd assumed was his by right? "She doesn't belong here," Derek said finally, his voice carrying a cold certainty that would have chilled Harper if she could have heard it. Transfer students need to understand the hierarchy before they start thinking they can challenge it. Maybe it's time someone taught her about respecting her betters. Kyle nodded eagerly, relieved to see Derek regaining his confidence and returning to the familiar territory of social intimidation. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, already anticipating the kind of systematic harassment campaign that had driven previous challengers away from Westfield. Derek smiled, but there was nothing warm in the expression. "Let's see how smart she really is when she doesn't have advantages we can't match," he said. "Intelligence is just one factor in success, and there are other ways to demonstrate who really runs this school." As Derek and Kyle left the bathroom to plan Harper's social destruction, neither of them realized they were about to target someone whose definition of conflict went far beyond academic debates and social media campaigns. Harper Williams had learned to fight in environments where losing meant more than damaged pride, and Derek's assumption that wealth and connections could overcome every opponent was about to receive the kind of education that couldn't be purchased at any price. The next 3 hours passed like a chess match played across multiple boards. Derek implementing subtle moves designed to isolate Harper socially, while she remained focused on academic achievement. During advanced placement chemistry, Derek whispered comments about diversity admits, loud enough for Harper to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. In calculus, he made sure to answer questions immediately after Harper spoke, demonstrating his superior preparation through expensive tutoring. At lunch, Derek's crew occupied tables near wherever Harper tried to sit, making conversation impossible through strategic proximity and calculated rudeness. Harper recognized the pattern. She'd seen similar campaigns in Detroit, though usually they involved less sophisticated psychological warfare and more direct intimidation. Derek was attempting to make her existence at Westfield so uncomfortable that she'd either submit to his authority or transfer back to whatever school system he assumed she belonged in. The strategy might have worked against a different target, but Harper had learned patience in boxing rings, where rash responses led to devastating counterattacks. By 2:30 p.m., Derek had convinced himself that his campaign was succeeding. Harper hadn't challenged him directly since first period, and she'd eaten lunch alone while his crew dominated the cafeteria's social dynamics. Kyle provided enthusiastic updates about how other students were already learning to dismiss Harper's contributions in class, understanding that supporting her meant risking Derek's displeasure and all the social consequences that entailed. Derek's confidence was about to be shattered by Harper's performance in advanced placement government, the one class where Mrs. Patterson encouraged aggressive debate and rewarded students who could defend controversial positions under pressure. Derek had dominated this class for 2 years, his family's political connections providing insider knowledge about campaign strategies and legislative processes that impressed teachers and intimidated classmates. The day's assignment was a mock congressional hearing about education funding, with students assigned roles as representatives arguing for different approaches to school finance reform. Derek drew the role of a conservative representative defending private school voucher programs, a position that aligned perfectly with his family's political philosophy and allowed him to argue from genuine conviction rather than academic exercise. Harper drew the role of a progressive representative advocating for increased public school funding, a position that required her to argue against the very system that had benefited Derek throughout his academic career. Mrs. Patterson expected this to be another showcase for Derek's political sophistication, but she was about to witness the most thorough intellectual dismantling in Westfield's recent history. Derek presented his opening argument with characteristic confidence, citing statistics about private school performance, economic theories about market competition in education, and personal anecdotes about the advantages of school choice. His preparation was excellent, his delivery polished, and his supporting evidence gathered from the most reputable conservative think tanks money could access. Several students took notes, recognizing that Derek's analysis would likely influence their own positions on the issue. Harper listened carefully to Derek's presentation, not just to the arguments he made, but to the assumptions underlying his position. She recognized immediately that Derek was arguing from a position of privilege, advocating for systems that worked well for families who could afford to supplement voucher programs with private funds while ignoring the reality faced by families who needed full public support for their children's education. When Mrs. Patterson called for Harper's response, the classroom energy shifted in ways that wouldn't become apparent until later. Harper stood slowly, her posture reflecting the confidence of someone who'd done extensive preparation despite lacking access to expensive research services and political consultants. Representative Mitchell presents compelling statistics about private school performance. Harper began, her tone respectful but confident. But his analysis ignores crucial context about selection bias and resource inequality. Private schools can choose their students. Public schools educate everyone. Comparing their performance without accounting for that fundamental difference is like comparing professional athletes to amateur players and concluding that coaching doesn't matter. Derek felt the familiar burn of intellectual challenge, but this time it was accompanied by something sharper and more personal. Harper wasn't just disagreeing with his position, she was exposing flaws in his reasoning that he hadn't anticipated or prepared to address. Harper continued her analysis with devastating precision. Furthermore, voucher programs consistently underfund the true cost of private education, meaning they primarily benefit families who can afford to supplement vouchers with substantial private contributions. For families living paycheck to paycheck, a voucher that covers 60% of private school tuition might as well cover 0%. They still can't access the choice that Representative Mitchell claims the program provides. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward in her chair, recognizing exceptional analytical thinking when she witnessed it. Harper wasn't reciting prepared talking points. She was conducting sophisticated policy analysis that demonstrated real understanding of complex socio-economic factors. The fundamental question, Harper said, building toward her conclusion, is whether we believe education should be a public good that provides equal opportunity for all children, or a private service that provides superior outcomes for those who can afford them. Voucher programs claim to increase choice, while actually reinforcing existing inequality. They allow wealthy families to subsidize private education with public funds, while leaving working-class families with underfunded public schools that lose resources every time a voucher student leaves. The silence that followed Harper's presentation was different from the polite attention Derek usually received. This was the quiet of students genuinely processing complex ideas rather than waiting for their turn to speak. Kyle looked confused. He'd never heard Derek's political positions challenged so thoroughly or systematically. Other students were scribbling notes, not just recording Harper's arguments, but questioning assumptions they'd never examined before. Derek realized that Harper had done more than win a debate. She'd exposed the self-serving nature of his political philosophy in ways that made his family's positions look intellectually bankrupt. Worse, she'd demonstrated a sophistication of thought that made his expensive preparation appear shallow by comparison. This wasn't just academic embarrassment. It was existential threat to his entire worldview. Mrs. Patterson broke the silence with genuine admiration. That was exceptional policy analysis from both representatives, she said, though her tone made clear which performance had impressed her more. Harper, I'd like to recommend you for the state debate championship team. Analysis of that caliber deserves a larger platform. Derek felt something snap inside his chest, a sound like expensive crystal hitting marble floors. The state debate team was supposed to be his achievement. Another line on his college application that demonstrated intellectual superiority and leadership potential. The possibility that Harper could earn through merit what he'd assumed was his by right sent rage coursing through his nervous system like poison. As students filed out of class, Derek could hear them discussing Harper's analysis with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for his own performances. Kyle stayed close, recognizing dangerous signs in Derek's body language and knowing that someone would pay for this humiliation before the day ended. Harper gathered her simple materials slowly, aware that Derek's attention had shifted from social intimidation to something more personal and potentially more dangerous. She'd hoped that demonstrating intellectual equality might earn Derek's respect, but his expression suggested she'd accomplished the opposite. The rage in his blue eyes reminded Harper of fighters who'd lost control, and she knew from experience that cornered predators were exponentially more dangerous than confident ones. Derek caught up with Harper in the hallway outside Mrs. Patterson's classroom, his movement purposeful and his expression cold enough to freeze water. Kyle flanked him automatically, providing the physical backup that Derek's family connections couldn't supply in this moment of pure, personal confrontation. We need to talk, Derek said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made other students automatically step aside and look away. Privately, Harper considered her options carefully. She could refuse the confrontation and risk escalating Derek's anger into something more public and potentially more dangerous. Or she could face whatever Derek had planned and hope her ability to read opponents would give her enough warning to protect herself. Fighting in hallways meant witnesses, and witnesses meant accountability that might prevent Derek from doing anything truly destructive. "Lead the way," Harper said quietly, her tone neutral, but her senses alert for any sign that this conversation was about to become something more physical than Derek's privileged upbringing had prepared him to handle. Derek led Harper toward the least populated wing of Westfield's sprawling campus, past empty classrooms and toward the older bathroom facilities that most students avoided due to their distance from main corridors. Kyle followed nervously, understanding that Derek's plans had evolved beyond social intimidation into territory that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. As they walked, Derek's rage crystallized into cold determination. Harper Williams represented everything he'd been taught to despise someone who thought merit alone entitled them to respect. Someone who challenged authority without understanding their proper place in the social hierarchy. Someone who threatened the natural order that kept people like Derek at the top and people like Harper grateful for whatever scraps they received. Harper felt her boxer's instincts activating, reading danger signals in Derek's posture, in Kyle's nervous energy, in the isolation of their destination. She'd made a mistake trusting that Derek's privileged background meant he'd limit himself to verbal intimidation, and now she was walking into a confrontation that could force her to break her promise to her mother about avoiding violence. The bathroom Derek chose was at the end of a hallway that most students never visited, old enough to lack the security cameras that monitored newer facilities, far enough from main corridors that screams might go unheard. Derek held the door open with mock courtesy, his smile promising consequences that Harper was about to discover extended far beyond academic embarrassment. As Harper walked through that doorway, she realized that Derek Mitchell was about to learn the difference between someone who'd inherited power and someone who'd earned it through surviving real conflict. The next few minutes would determine whether Derek's assumptions about wealth equaling strength were accurate, or whether Harper's secrets were about to transform their relationship in ways that would leave Derek questioning everything he'd believed about himself and his place in the world. The bathroom door closed behind them with the finality of a prison cell, and Derek's transformation from entitled student to dangerous predator was about to collide with Harper's hidden identity as a trained fighter who'd spent years learning to protect herself and others from exactly this kind of threat. The bathroom tiles reflected the fluorescent lighting like a boxing ring, and Derek's predatory smile revealed the true monster that wealth and privilege had been hiding beneath his polished exterior. Kyle positioned himself near the door, his nervous energy betraying uncertainty about how far Derek planned to take this confrontation beyond the realm of academic rivalry into something that could destroy all their futures. "You think you're smart," Derek said, his voice dropping to the register of genuine menace that Harper had heard before in Detroit's darkest corners. "But intelligence doesn't matter when you don't understand your place in the food chain. Maybe it's time someone taught you about respect." Harper's boxing instincts screamed warnings as Derek moved closer, his body language shifting from entitled bully to genuine predator. She'd misread the situation completely. Derek's privileged background hadn't made him soft. It had made him dangerous in ways that street fighters couldn't imagine. Rich kids who'd never faced consequences for their actions had no internal limits when their worldview was threatened. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Harper said carefully, positioning herself with the kind of subtle footwork that Maria Santos had drilled into her during thousands of training hours. "We're just students having academic discussions. There's no need for this to become personal." Derek laughed, the sound echoing off bathroom tiles with cruel satisfaction. "Academic discussions," he repeated. "You embarrassed me in front of the entire class, made me look stupid in front of teachers who've respected my family for generations. That requires consequences." Kyle stepped forward uncertainly. "Derek, maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Derek snapped, his attention focused entirely on Harper with the intensity of someone whose entire identity had been built on intellectual superiority that she'd systematically demolished. "She needs to understand what happens to scholarship kids who forget their place." Derek reached into his backpack and pulled out his phone, activating the camera with deliberate precision. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to forcing compliance through intimidation. "You're going to apologize for your disrespectful behavior. Then you're going to drink from that toilet bowl while I record it. The video goes viral. You transfer schools in shame, and natural order gets restored." Harper felt the familiar calm that preceded combat, her heart rate slowing as years of training took control of her nervous system. Derek had crossed the line from psychological intimidation into physical threat, and Harper's promise to her mother about avoiding violence was about to collide with her deeper obligation to protect herself from genuine danger. "I'm not drinking from any toilet," Harper said quietly, her tone carrying undertones that Derek was too arrogant to recognize as warning signals. "And you're not recording anything." Derek's face twisted with rage at her refusal to submit. "Then we'll make you!" he snarled, lunging forward with Kyle behind him to grab Harper's shoulders and force her toward the toilet bowl. The next 17 seconds unfolded with brutal efficiency that left both attackers unconscious on bathroom tiles that suddenly resembled a crime scene more than an academic institution. Harper's first move disabled Kyle with a precise uppercut that Maria Santos had taught her for opponents who relied on size over skill, the blow landing beneath his solar plexus with enough force to drop him instantly without causing permanent damage. Derek's shock at seeing his backup eliminated so effortlessly gave Harper the opening she needed to demonstrate 5 years of competitive boxing training. Derek swung wildly, his wealthy boy's approximation of fighting meeting Harper's disciplined technique with predictable results. Harper's combination was textbook perfect left jab to disorient, right cross to the jaw that sent Derek staggering, and a final uppercut that ended his consciousness along with his reign of terror at Westfield High. Standing over their unconscious forms, Harper felt the warrior inside her retreating as quickly as it had emerged. These weren't professional opponents or dangerous street fighters. They were pampered teenagers whose worst behavior had been enabled by money and privilege until someone finally held them accountable for their actions. Derek stirred first, his blue eyes opening to find Harper crouched beside him with genuine concern rather than triumph. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of compassion that Derek had never received after losing anything in his entire life. You destroyed me," Derek whispered, tears mixing with blood from his split lip as the full scope of his humiliation penetrated his consciousness. "Everyone will know that a scholarship kid beat up Derek Mitchell. My family, my future, everything's ruined." Harper saw something in Derek's breakdown that reminded her of fighters who'd lost their first professional bout. The moment when invincibility myths crumbled and revealed the frightened child underneath. "No one has to know anything," she said quietly. "Kyle's unconscious. There's no video. This stays between us if you're willing to change." Derek stared at Harper with confusion that gradually transformed into something resembling respect. "Why would you protect me after what I tried to do? Because destroying you doesn't make me stronger," Harper replied, helping Derek sit up despite his attempt to assault her moments earlier. Real strength means knowing when not to fight, and real victory means turning enemies into allies when possible. 6 months later, Derek and Harper co-presented their anti-bullying initiative to the Texas State Education Board, their partnership becoming the foundation for policy changes that protected vulnerable students across the state. Derek had learned that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than tearing them down, while Harper had discovered that sometimes the greatest victories came from choosing mercy over revenge. Their story spread far beyond Westfield's marble halls, inspiring students nationwide to stand up against institutional intimidation while choosing compassion over destruction. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent teaches you the most valuable lessons about yourself. And sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing exactly when not to use the power you've worked so hard to develop. If you've ever faced someone who seemed untouchable, remember that everyone has breaking points. Everyone deserves chances at redemption. And real warriors know that the most important battles are fought with wisdom rather than fists.